Hello, everyone, and welcome to the overview of Lesson 1 in Vistas. In this overview, I'm going to give you some of the basic information that you need to know to be successful with the material in Lesson 1. So let's go ahead and get started. I'm going to share a screen here, and this is how we get started. All right, folks, let me get to the right spot. I should have done that already, but I forgot. And we're going to start with nouns, articles, and agreement. We'll talk about what all that means, okay? Nouns in Spanish are either masculine or feminine. That doesn't mean that they have masculine or feminine characteristics. It's just that a lot of words in Spanish end in O, a lot of other words end in A, and they just said that the words that end in O are masculine. It doesn't really mean anything. The words that end in A are feminine. Let me give you an example right here. Libro, for some reason, is considered a masculine noun. It's not, doesn't mean anything. You don't have to understand that. It's just a category, you might say. Whereas computadora, it ends in an A, is considered feminine, okay? So not every word in Spanish ends in an O or an A, and some words, a lot of words end in E. So let's take a look here. And for example, clase happens to be feminine and parque happens to be masculine. So words that end in E, you've got to memorize. Also, be aware that if we're talking about something that could be either a man or a woman, then it can be either. And so for example, estudiante means a student, but that could be a female student or a male student. So be aware that there are those little changes there. Some nouns end in a consonant, and these nouns may be either masculine or feminine. You can't tell by looking at them, and their gender must be memorized. So for some reason, lapis is masculine, and you need to remember that. And nacionalidad happens to be feminine. You need to remember that too, okay? Now, there are some other minor rules regarding the gender of nouns, and you'll want to take a look in your e-text at pages 12 through 14 just to see what all those little rules are. And they're not particularly difficult, but just it's a little too much for me to give right here. So check that out. And let's move on. How do we make a noun plural then? We've already learned that they can be masculine or feminine. So if we need to make it plural, if a noun ends in a vowel, it's pretty simple. We just, as a general rule, we just add S. Estudiante becomes estudiantes. Chico, meaning boy, becomes chicos. Okay? That's pretty simple. If a noun ends in a consonant, as a general rule, we add ES to make it plural. Mujer, woman, becomes mujeres. Lección becomes lecciones. We just add the ES. Okay, that's pretty simple. So what about articles? We need to be able to say the in Spanish, and the definite article, what's known as the definite article in English, is the. In Spanish, we use el, la, los, and las to express this one word, the, in English. Why is that? That's because each article must agree with the noun it is used with. We'll talk about what that means. El is used for masculine singular nouns, and la is used for feminine singular nouns. Los and las are used for the plural forms of masculine and singular nouns. So let's take a look. What do I mean by that? If I say el libro, that's one book, the book. The book is masculine, so I use the masculine singular article, so I get el libro. But if I want to say the books, I've got to change not just libros, I've got to change the article as well to plural. And that article happens to be los libros, okay? Los, so it's los libros. When it's feminine, la estudiante, that becomes las estudiantes when you make a singular feminine noun plural, okay? So the indefinite article in English is known as a or un, like a book or an apple, okay? Now, how do we express that in Spanish? With either un, una, unos, or unas, kind of just like the definite article, but different words, right? So un is used for masculine singular nouns. Una is used for feminine singular nouns, sorry. And unos and unas are the plural forms of that. So here's an example. Un teléfono is a telephone. Unos teléfonos means some telephones or a few phones or something like that, right? Same thing with feminine, una computadora, unas computadoras. So those words need to be memorized. You need to know el, la, los, and las, and unos, unas, una, and unas, okay? And unos and unas, I just mentioned this, but they generally have the meaning of some. I means there are. Hay unos lápices en la mesa means there are some pencils on there's a few pencils on the table, something along those lines. Okay. Why don't we move on? And we're going to start in on numbers 1 through 30. Now, rather than listing them all here, I'll just let you know they're on page 16 in your e-text. You need to know them. So here's just a few things that you need to know about them. You need to study the numbers and make sure that you know how to say 1 through 30. So when we're simply counting, we just say uno, dos, tres, etc., all the way up to 30. But when we express the idea of one masculine singular noun, the uno becomes shortened to, misspelled that, sorry about that, I'll fix that later, to un, right? So we say uno, dos, tres, but we say un libro, un chico, un, no say, un lápiz, whatever, okay? So here's an example. Hay un chico, remember the I means there is, hay un chico y una chica en la clase, all right? The number 20 is expressed as 20, but when we go from 21 to 29, we change it a little bit and it's 21, 22, 23. It's all one word all the way up to 29, okay? Useful expressions with numbers. A lot of times we ask how many things there are. So you're going to use either cuantos, if you're talking about masculine objects, like cuantos libros, how many books, or cuantas computadoras, if you're talking about feminine items, okay? And the expression I means both there is and there are. It's not really confusing to native speakers. It won't be to you either. So here's an example. ¿Cuántos estudiantes hay en la clase? Hay 3 chicos y 5 chicas. Okay, I hope that's all pretty clear to you. We're going to move on and start to study the verb ser. Now, the verb ser means to be in English. And just so we understand what we're talking about, when we conjugate a verb, for example, I can't say I to be Dave. I have to say I am Dave. So that we're talking about the conjugations of the verb to be, which are I am, you are, he, she, it is, we are, and they are. Those are the conjugations of the verb ser. Now, to start that in Spanish, we want to start with the subject pronouns. How do you say I, you, he, she, we, they, and that sort of stuff? It's a little bit different in Spanish. So pay attention to this part. Yo is pretty easy. If you want to say I, you just say yo. But there's more than one way to say you in Spanish. If we're talking to a friend or somebody our own age, or especially a family member, we generally speaking use to say you. But there is a formal way of speaking in Spanish when you're speaking to somebody that's older than you, maybe your boss, somebody that you want to show a lot of respect to, perhaps a teacher would be a good person to use usted with, a professor, that would be a good person to use usted with. And we use the usted form. Now, don't worry too much about that right now. Just understand that there's 2 ways to say you when you're talking to one person. There's tu that's informal and usted that's formal. There's also well, this is moving on. There's él to say he and ella to say she. And we're going to make these plural. So to say we say nosotros. If we are all female, all women, all girls, then we change nosotros to nosotras to indicate that it's all female, okay? If we are talking to more than one person, I want to say you all. This is not formal specifically. It's just anytime in Spanish you are talking to more than one person, you are addressing several people, then you use ustedes. It's just the plural form of you in Spanish. I know we don't have this in English, but it exists in Spanish, so you've got to know tú, usted, and ustedes as different ways of saying you. We also have ellos, they, for masculine or a mixed group. We also have ellas for they when it's entirely females, okay? You'll get used to all that as we go through. Let's take a look. I sort of all explained this already, but tú and usted both mean you when you're speaking to one person. We have formal and informal forms of address. When you talk to a family member, a friend, somebody your own age, we usually use tú. There are exceptions to that, but use that as your guiding rule. You're talking to a professor, someone much older, a boss. As a general rule, use the usted form. Okay. When we address several people, we use the ustedes form. It does not indicate formality. You're not being formal. It's just a way of talking to more than one person. It means you, plural. Okay. Let's go on. Now that we are familiar with these subject pronouns, and you can come back and study them if you need to really get them dialed in. Oh, I'm sorry. We're almost there. Let's want to look at one more thing. Nosotros means we, but we change that to nosotras when it's an all-female group. All right. In our e-text, you will see the vosotros form given. This form it means you, plural, but we don't use it in the Americas. You do not need to use it when we are going to admit it from our studies. They have to include it in our textbook because it is part of Spanish, but you do not need to learn those forms. They're not going to be tested in our course, okay? Now, the conjugations of the verb ser. How do we say I am, you are, he is, she is, we are, they are? We're going to use these conjugations. If you need to say I am in Spanish, you say yo soy. If you are talking to a friend or a family member and you want to say you are, you say tú eres. If you're talking to a professor, somebody older than you, you want to use more formal language, you say usted es. And it just means you are, okay? So it means the same thing as tú eres, but you're being more polite, more formal, okay? Él es, ella es means he is, she is, nosotros or nosotras somos means we are. Ellos and ellas son, they are, and ustedes son means you, all, you, plural, are, okay? So you need to know these conjugations. In all honesty, you must memorize them. You can't really go on in Spanish until you do. So you learn those, and I'm going to also tell you about some of the uses that we can have you get out of ser, right? There is no apostrophe s in Spanish. So you use the verb ser to express possession. Here's an example. If you want to know whose book is this, you go, ¿de quién es el libro? Whose book is this? Whose book is it, right? Of whom is this book or is the book? We cannot say apostrophe S in Spanish, so we go es el libro de Juana. It's the book of Juana. That made me seem a little, complicated, but that's how you have to indicate possession in Spanish because there is no apostrophe S. So don't try to say es Juana's book. It doesn't work. You've got to say es el libro de Juana. There's a couple more uses I want to touch on. We can use ser to express origin. For example, if I want to ask, where are you from? And I'm talking to a teacher or something like that, I would go, ¿de dónde es usted? From where are you? Which is, we would normally say, where are you from? This person says, yo soy de Argentina. Okay, I am from Argentina. And we also use ser to express profession or occupational things. Like if I wanted to know, are those women over there teachers? It goes, son ellas profesoras? Are they teachers? No. I just chose an answer. No, comma, ellas son estudiantes. No, they are students. Okay. So that kind of wraps up our study of the verb ser. Get into your e-text to go over that a little more detail if you want to. Okay. Last thing we're going to talk about here is telling time in Spanish. And there's some expressions we need to know. To ask what time it is, use this expression. Anytime you want to know what time it is, you go ¿qué hora es? There's a difference in Spanish between saying it's 1 o'clock and saying any other time. If you want to say it's 1 o'clock, you say es la una. It is 1 o'clock. For any time between 2 and noon or midnight, you're going to say son las dos, son las tres. Son las cuatro, etc. So here's an example. ¿Qué hora es? What time is it? Son las tres. And I put in de la tarde just to make it clear that we're talking about in the afternoon, PM. So let's talk about that right now. To express AM or PM, use de la mañana for morning times up to noon, de la tarde for afternoon times to around 6 o'clock. This is not an exact number, but around 6 o'clock is generally where we use de la tarde. And if it's evening times up to midnight, we say de la noche. Okay? Useful expressions that you need to know. Mediodía means noon. Note that even though it looks feminine because it ends in A, it's actually masculine. It's one of the exceptions. So it's el mediodía, and that means noon. Medianoche is feminine. It means midnight, la medianoche. Here's some other ones. E, well, you're going to see how to use these in just a minute, so give me a second here. E means plus or more. Menos means minus. Y treinta mean, or y media is used to say a half an hour. We'll see this in just a second. Y or menos cuarto or quince is used with a quarter hour, like it's 2:15, it's 3:15, something like that. I give some examples here that I think will make it a little clearer. To express a time from the hour to up to the half hour, like 3:20, 3:29, 3:10, whatever. Say the hour with E and the number of minutes. Pretty simple, right? It's easy. It's just about what we do in English. If you're trying to express 7:10 p.m., say this: son las 7:10 de la noche, and you're done. That's all you got to say. But if you're trying to express time from after the half hour up to the next hour, something like 7:40 or 7:45 or anything after the half hour, what you're going to do is say the next hour with menos, and then the number of minutes that remain until you get to the next hour. So let's take a look at 8:40 a.m. It is possible in English to say it's 8:40, but it's also possible, just to make this a little clearer, to get you the idea of what we're doing, we often say, oh, it's 20 minutes to 9. What we're kind of saying, it's 9 minus 20 minutes. Well, that's what you're going to do in Spanish. So the way we say, and it's the only way you're really supposed to do this in Spanish. So to say 8:40 a.m., we go to the next hour, because this is after the half hour. So we go son las 9 menos 20. It's 9 minus 20 minutes. You don't have to say minutes, but it's 9 minus 20 de la mañana. That's how you say 8:40. Okay, that's kind of a standard rule. Although I will say with digital watches, a lot of native speakers are looking at 8:40 on their watch and they go, oh, it's son las 8:40. We're going to need to know this way of saying it for our course. Okay, so just be aware that this is how we say it. Okay, and this could also be done with quarter hours and a half hour. So if it's 3:15 p.m., you say son las 3:15. You could also say y quince if you want to, de la tarde. If it's 1:45, now check this out. Remember that I've got to go to the next hour. So if I'm saying it's 2, I've got to go back to my first rule and say son las 2 menos cuarto or menos quince de la tarde. Note that since the next hour is 2 p.m., we must say son las 2, etc., etc. Okay? And here's the last one I give you. Son las 9:30 de la noche. And I think that's all I've got for you today. So I'm going to stop the share and say that I hope that this helped you understand the material for lesson 1. As always, you can let me know if there's questions. I am going to stop this recording now, and I will say goodbye and hasta luego.